In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a silk merchant lies dead in his locked parlour, strangled by his own luxurious scarf. Was it his poised young wife, hiding secrets in her London letters, the nervous clerk, burdened by a mysterious payment, the bitter rival, ruined by greed, or the silent maid, haunted by a past she won't speak? Only Miss Jane Marple, with her keen eyes and quiet wisdom, can unravel the threads of motive and deceit to reveal a killer hiding in plain sight. Welcome to the choked merchant, a web of betrayal where every knot tells a deadly tale. Chapter 1. A quiet village. Shaken, the morning sun cast a soft glow over St. Mary Mead, its golden rays filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage. The village, nestled in a gentle fold of the English countryside, was a place where life moved at a predictable pace, its rhythms marked by the chime of the church bell and the daily chatter at the grocer's. Yet, on this particular Tuesday, an undercurrent of unease rippled through the cobblestone lanes, as tangible as the scent of freshly baked bread from Mrs. Price's bakery. Miss Marple, seated in her favourite armchair by the window, her knitting needles clicking with the precision of a metronome, sensed it before her maid, Lily, burst through the door, her apron slightly askew. "Miss Marple, have you heard?" Lily's voice was a breathless mix of horror and excitement, her eyes wide as she clutched a duster. "It's Mr. Grayson, the silk merchant up at Willow House. Found dead this morning. He was strangled, they say, with one of his own scarves." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild blue eyes lifting to meet Lily's. "Strangled, you say?" she murmured, her tone calm but laced with a keen interest that belied her frail appearance. "How very shocking. Tell me, Lily, what exactly is being said?" Lily, eager to share the village's freshest scandal, perched on the edge of a chair, her words tumbling out. "They found him in his parlour, miss, just after dawn. Clara, the maid, screamed the house down when she saw him. The scarf was knotted so tight round his neck, they say it took 2 men to loosen it, and the door locked from the inside, with the key in his pocket. Folk are saying it's murder, plain as day, though who'd do such a thing to Mr. Grayson? I couldn't guess." Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the soft clack of needles a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. Harold Grayson was no stranger to St. Mary Mead, though his grand Georgian home, Willow House, set him apart from the humbler cottages. A silk merchant of considerable wealth, he had built a trade empire that stretched from London to the Orient. His shipments of shimmering fabrics, coveted by the fashionable set. Yet his success had not come without cost. Whispers of sharp business practices and a domineering manner followed him, and Miss Marple, with her knack for noticing the undercurrents of human nature, had long suspected his prosperity masked tensions, perhaps deadly ones. "Was anyone seen at Willow House last night?" Miss Marple asked, her voice deceptively gentle, as if inquiring about the weather. Lily shook her head. "Not that I've heard. Miss Grayson was there, of course, his wife. So young and pretty, though she keeps to herself. And Clara, the maid, lives in. Mr. Reed, the clerk, might have been about earlier, but he's always at the office in the village by evening. Oh, and there's talk of Mr. Baxter, that rival of Mr. Grayson's, being sore about some business deal, but no one saw anyone strange, least not yet." Miss Marple nodded, filing away each detail. Evelyn Grayson, the merchant's second wife, was a delicate beauty, her marriage to the older, ambitious Grayson a subject of much village speculation. Thomas Reed, the clerk, was a fixture at Grayson's side, his quiet demeanour masking what Miss Marple suspected was a sharp mind. Lionel Baxter, the rival merchant, was a blustery man whose fortunes had waned as Grayson soared. And Clara Dunn, the maid, was a local girl, reserved but observant. Each, Miss Marple mused, could have a story to tell or a secret to hide. The doorbell chimed, interrupting her thoughts, and Lily hurried to answer it. Moments later, Inspector Craddock entered, his face etched with the strain of a man grappling with a puzzle. A detective from the county police, he had come to value Miss Marple's insights, her unassuming manner a foil for her razor-sharp mind. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said, settling into a chair. "I expect you've heard about the trouble at Willow House." "Indeed, Inspector," she replied, setting her knitting aside. "A most disturbing affair. Strangled with a silk scarf, I understand, and the parlour locked. Have you formed any impressions?" Craddock sighed, running a hand through his greying hair. "It's a queer case. Grayson was found by the maid at 6 this morning, the scarf one of his own imports tied, in a peculiar knot. No signs of a struggle, which is odd for a man of his strength. The locked door baffles me most. The key was in his pocket, and the windows were latched tight. We're questioning Mrs. Grayson, the clerk, the maid, and Baxter, but so far it's all conjecture." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with quiet intensity. "A locked room and a deliberate knot," she said softly. "It suggests someone with both access and intent. Mr. Grayson was not, I gather, a man without enemies." Craddock nodded. His business dealings were cutthroat. Baxter's been vocal about losing trade to him, and there's talk of Grayson pressuring his suppliers ruthlessly. Even his wife seemed distant when I spoke to her. As for the clerk, Reed, he's nervous, though that could be shock." Miss Marple tilted her head, her mind conjuring parallels from her vast store of village observations. "People, Inspector, are much like patterns in a tapestry. The threads may seem orderly, but tug one, and the design unravels. I should like to see Willow House, if I may." Craddock smiled, accustomed to her requests. "I thought you might. Come this afternoon, if you're able. Your eye for detail might catch what mine misses." As he left, Miss Marple returned to her knitting, her fingers moving mechanically while her mind wove through the morning's revelations. A silk scarf, a locked door, a merchant dead in his prime. These were not random threads, but part of a deliberate design. St. Mary Mead, for all its sleepy charm, had secrets, and Miss Marple knew that unravelling them would require patience, observation, and a touch of her own quiet cunning. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime. The afternoon sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Willow House as Miss Jane Marple stepped from Inspector Craddock's car. The Georgian mansion, with its ivy-clad walls and tall sash windows, stood as a testament to Harold Grayson's wealth, its elegance a stark contrast to the grim purpose of her visit. A constable nodded deferentially as they approached the oak front door, its brass knocker gleaming under the fading light. Miss Marple's sharp eyes took in the scene, the neatly trimmed rose bushes, the gravel path free of weeds, and the faint scent of polish that lingered even outdoors. "A house of order," she murmured to herself, "yet disorder has found its way inside." Inspector Craddock, his notebook tucked under one arm, led her through the hall, where a crystal chandelier sparkled above a polished marble floor. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax and, faintly, the metallic tang of recent tragedy. "The parlour's this way," he said, his voice low, as if reluctant to disturb the silence. "We've kept it as we found it, save for removing body? The coroner's preliminary report confirms strangulation, likely between 8 and 10 last night. The scarf did the job, silk, strong as steel when twisted right. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning over the details Lily had shared. That morning, a locked door, a key in the victim's pocket, and a scarf from Grayson's own stock. As they entered the parlour, she paused, letting her gaze sweep the room with the quiet intensity of a painter studying a canvas. The space was opulent, a merchant showcase of success. Mahogany bookshelves lined the walls, their shelves groaning under the weight of ledgers and neatly labelled boxes of silk samples. A Persian rug, its intricate patterns glowing in jewel tones, covered the floor. At the centre stood a heavy oak desk, its surface cluttered with papers, an inkstand, and a small brass paperweight shaped like a ship. 2 leather armchairs flanked a marble fireplace, where embers still smouldered, and above it hung a portrait of Grayson himself, his stern face framed by a high collar, his eyes seeming to follow their movements. The windows, tall and mullioned, overlooked the garden, their latches gleaming as if recently polished. Miss Marple noted their sturdy design. No easy entry there, she thought, unless one knew a floor. Her attention lingered on the desk, where a single silk scarf lay coiled. Like a serpent, its rich blue hue flecked with gold threads. It was the murder weapon, Craddock had said, left behind by the killer. She stepped closer, her gloved fingers hovering but not touching. The scarves, now loosened by the police, had been described as intricate, almost decorative. A curious choice, she said softly, to use something so beautiful for something so brutal. Craddock, standing by the fireplace, gestured to the door. This is what puzzles me most, Miss Marple. The door was locked from the inside when Clara Dunn found him. The key was in Grayson's waistcoat pocket, and there's no sign it was tampered with. The lock's a sturdy Yale, not easily picked. If the killer got in and out, they did it without leaving a trace. Miss Marple approached the door, her slight figure dwarfed by its solid oak frame. She examined the lock, her eyes narrowing as she traced the keyhole with a finger. And the windows? She asked, turning back to the room. All latched, Craddock replied, crossing to the nearest one. He demonstrated, lifting the sash slightly before the latch caught. I had the constable check each one. No scratches, no forced entry. It's as if the killer vanished into thin air. Or never left, Miss Marple mused, her tone light but her mind racing. She returned to the desk, her gaze falling on the papers scattered across it. Bills of lading, contracts, and a letter half-written in Grayson's bold hand, business as usual. It seemed, until death intervened. She noted a small drawer, slightly ajar, and peered inside, a spare key glinting in the dim light. Inspector, did you find this drawer open when you arrived? Craddock frowned, consulting his notebook. The constable didn't mention it, but I'll check. Why, a spare key, she said, might explain much. If Grayson kept one here, someone familiar with his habits could have used it to lock the door after the deed. She let the thought hang, her eyes scanning the room for other clues. The absence of struggle, Craddock had noted, was striking. Grayson was a robust man, not easily overpowered, yet the room showed no signs of a fight, no overturned chairs, no scattered papers beyond the desk's usual clutter. He knew his killer, she said at last, or was taken by surprise. Perhaps both. Craddock nodded, jotting down her observation. That fits with the coroner's report. No defensive wounds, no bruising beyond the neck. The scarf was pulled tight and held deliberate, not a spur-of-a-moment act. Miss Marple moved to the fireplace, her fingers brushing the mantel where a small clock ticked softly. What time did Clara find him, exactly? 6 this morning, Craddock said. She came to light the fire, saw him slumped in the armchair, and screamed the house down. Mrs. Grayson was upstairs, still in her nightgown when we arrived. She claims she heard nothing after retiring at 8:30 last night. And the others? Miss Marple asked, her voice deceptively casual. Thomas. Reed, the clerk, says he left at 7 after going over accounts with Grayson. He was at the Blue Boar by 8, according to the landlord. Lionel Baxter claims he was at home, his housekeeper backing him up, though she's half deaf and not the most reliable witness. Clara Dunn, the maid, was in her attic room by 8. Heard nothing, saw nothing. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, a sign to those who knew her that her mind was weaving connections. A tight timeline, she said. Grayson was alive at 7, dead by 10, and the killer gone without a trace. Yet the scarf remains, almost as if left to taunt us. She bent closer to the scarf, noting its texture smooth, almost slippery, yet strong enough to kill. This was no ordinary knot, she added. It suggests skill, perhaps familiarity with silk or rope. A sailor might tie such a knot, or someone in the trade. Craddock raised an eyebrow. Baxter's in the silk. Business too. Think he'd know his way around a scarf. Possibly, Miss Marple said, her tone non-committal. But we mustn't leap to conclusions. People are like villagers, inspectorful of hidden paths. We must tread them carefully. She turned her attention to the bookshelves, her fingers trailing lightly over the ledgers. Each was labelled by year and trade route: Bombay, Shanghai, Constantinople. Grayson's empire was vast, and with it came enemies rivals like Baxter. Suppliers squeezed by his tactics, even employees chafing under his demands. She opened one ledger at random, its pages filled with Grayson's precise handwriting and Reed's smaller, neater annotations. A recent entry caught her eye. A shipment delayed, with a note in Reed's hand about a dispute with a supplier. Trouble in the business, she murmured. It may not be the motive, but it's a thread to follow. Craddock, watching her, smiled faintly. You see things I miss, Miss Marple, always have. What's your first impression? She straightened, her eyes bright with quiet determination. This was no random act, Inspector. The locked door, the scarf, the absence of struggle, they point to someone who planned carefully. Someone who knew Grayson's habits and his home. The killer was bold to strike in his own parlour, yet clever enough to leave no obvious trace. We must look to those closest to him, his wife, his clerk, his rival, his maid. Each has a place in his world, and each, I suspect, has a secret. Craddock closed his notebook with a snap. I've arranged to interview Mrs. Grayson this afternoon. Care to join me? She's expecting us at 3. I should be delighted, Miss Marple said, though her tone held a hint of steel. Mrs. Grayson will be grieving, no doubt, but grief can mask many things. I shall observe her closely. As they left the parlour, Miss Marple cast a final glance at the scarf, its blue folds catching the light. It was a beautiful thing, she thought, crafted with care in some distant land, only to become an instrument of death. She recalled a similar case in St. Mary Mead years ago, when a gardener's twine had betrayed a jealous husband. Objects, she knew, could tell stories, and this scarf had a tale yet to unfold. Outside, the air was cool, the garden alive with the hum of bees. Craddock offered her his arm as they walked to the car, but Miss Marple, spry despite her years, declined with a smile. "I shall walk back to the village, Inspector. It clears the mind, and I have much to think on." He tipped his hat. "I'll see you at 3, then. And Miss Marple, be careful. Whoever did this is still out there." She nodded, her expression serene, but her mind a whirl of possibilities. As Craddock's car disappeared down the drive, she set off along the lane, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel. The village lay quiet under the afternoon sun, its cottages and shops a familiar tapestry of life. Yet beneath that calm, Miss Marple knew, lurked the shadow of murder. Harold Grayson's death was no accident, no crime of passion. It was a calculated act, and the killer, she was certain, was someone who moved among them, hiding behind a mask. Of respectability, she paused by the churchyard, where the vicar was tending a rosebush. "A sad day, Miss Marple," he called, his voice heavy. "Poor Grayson. Who could do such a thing?" "Someone close, I fear," she replied, her eyes distant. "Someone who knew him well." The vicar shook his head, returning to his roses. And Miss Marple continued on, her thoughts turning to the suspects. Evelyn Grayson, the young wife, whose beauty might hide ambition or resentment. Thomas Reed, the clerk, whose loyalty could conceal a deeper grievance. Lionel Baxter, the rival, whose losses gave him motive. And Clara Dunn, the maid, whose silence might shield a secret. Each was a piece in the puzzle, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, would fit them together as she reached her cottage. Lily greeted her with a cup of tea and a fresh wave of gossip. "They're saying at the post office that Mr. Baxter was seen arguing with Grayson last week," she said, her eyes gleaming. "Something about a contract gone sour." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind filing the tidbit away. "Gossip is like knitting, Lily," she said. "One must sort the threads carefully to see the pattern. Now, fetch my shawl. I have an appointment with Mrs. Grayson, and I mustn't be late." As Lily scurried off, Miss Marple gazed out her window. The village spread before her like a map of human nature. Harold Grayson's murder was a knot, complex and tightly drawn, but she had unravelled such knots before. With patience, observation, and a touch of intuition, she would find the thread that led to the truth. Chapter 3. The grieving widow. The clock in Miss Marple's cottage struck 2:30 as she adjusted her shawl and picked up her sturdy black handbag. The walk to Willow House was brisk, the autumn air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. St. Mary Mead lay bathed in the soft light of late afternoon, its thatched roofs and tidy gardens a picture of tranquillity. Yet Miss Marple's mind was far from serene. The image of Harold Grayson's parlour, with its coiled silk scarf and locked door, lingered like a half-solved riddle. Inspector Craddock's car waited at the gate, and she climbed in, her expression composed but her eyes alight with purpose. "Mrs. Grayson's expecting us," Craddock said as they drove, his hands steady on the wheel. "She's shaken, naturally, but cooperative. I'm hoping you'll pick up on anything I might miss. She's a cool one. I'll give her that hardly shed a tear when I spoke to her this morning." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to Evelyn Grayson, the merchant's second wife. Was a figure of fascination in the village, her youth and elegance a contrast to Grayson's stern demeanour. Gossip painted her as a London beauty, swept up by Grayson's wealth, but perhaps chafing under his control. "Coolness in grief is not always guilt, Inspector," she said softly. "Some hearts break quietly." Willow House loomed ahead, its windows glinting like watchful eyes. A maid not Clara Dunn, Miss Marple noted, but an older woman with a pinched face ushered them into the drawing-room. The space was a study in refinement. Chintz curtains, a rosewood piano, and a silver tea service gleaming on a sideboard. Evelyn Grayson sat on a velvet settee, her black morning gown accentuating her pale skin and auburn hair. She rose as they entered, her movements graceful but measured, as if each gesture were rehearsed. "Inspector Craddock, Miss Marple," she said, her voice low and steady. "Please, sit. I'm grateful you've come, though I fear I have little to add to what I told you earlier." Miss Marple settled into an armchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze taking in every detail. Evelyn's face was composed, her green eyes shadowed but dry. A faint scent of lavender clung to her, and her hands, resting on the settee, bore no rings save a simple gold band. On a table nearby stood a framed photograph of her and Grayson, taken perhaps a year ago, their smiles stiff and formal. "A handsome couple," Miss Marple remarked, her tone gentle. "You must miss him terribly." Evelyn's lips tightened, and she glanced at the photograph. Harold was a forceful man. His death is a shock, but I confess we were not always close. Our life together was complicated. Craddock opened his notebook, his pencil poised. "Mrs. Grayson, let's go over last night again. You said you dined with your husband at 7, then retired to your room by 8:30. Did you hear or see anything unusual after that?" Evelyn shook her head, her fingers smoothing the fabric of her gown. "Nothing. I read for a while Jane Austen, if it matters, then went to bed. The house was quiet. Harold often worked late in his parlour, so I thought nothing of it. It wasn't until Clara's screams this morning that I knew." Her voice faltered, and she looked away toward the window. Miss Marple watched her closely, noting the slight tremor in her hands, quickly stilled. "And the scarf, Mrs. Grayson," she said, her voice mild, "the one used to end his life. It was from your husband's collection, I understand. Did you recognize it?" Evelyn's eyes flicked back, a flash of unease crossing her face. "I don't know. Harold dealt in so many silks. I rarely paid attention to his stock. If it was one of his, it could have come from anywhere: his office, the warehouse, even here. He often brought samples home." Craddock leaned forward. "You didn't notice any visitors yesterday? No one calling unexpectedly?" "None," Evelyn said firmly. "Thomas Reed was here in the afternoon, going over accounts, but he left before dinner. Clara served us, then went to her room. Harold mentioned no appointments, and I saw no one else." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of kindly concern. "It must be lonely, my dear, in such a large house, with your husband so often absorbed in his work. Did you ever feel overlooked?" Evelyn's cheeks flushed faintly, and she straightened. Harold was devoted to his business. "I understood that when we married. I had my own interests: music, books, the garden. We found a balance." Her tone was defensive, and Miss Marple noted the way her fingers tightened on the settee's arm. "Quite so," Miss Marple said, her voice soothing. "And yet, a young woman like you, so full of life, there must have been moments of strain. Village life can be stifling, I know, having seen many a young bride adjust." Evelyn's gaze hardened, though her smile remained. "I chose this life, Miss Marple. If you're suggesting I was unhappy enough too." She stopped, her breath catching. "I loved Harold, in my way. I would never harm him." Craddock cleared his throat, sensing the tension. "No one's accusing you, Mrs. Grayson. We're just trying to understand the household. Tell me about Mr. Reed." How did he get on with your husband? Evelyn relaxed slightly, grateful for the shift. Thomas is diligent, quiet. Harold relied on him for the accounts, though he could be demanding. I never saw them argue, but Harold's standards were high. Thomas seemed loyal, always eager to please, and Mr. Baxter, Craddock pressed. We've heard he and your husband were rivals. Evelyn's lips curved in a faint, bitter smile. Lionel Baxter despised Harold. They competed for years, but recently Harold secured a contract that cost Baxter dearly. He came here last week, shouting about unfair tactics. I heard them from the hall. Harold told him to leave or face ruin. Baxter stormed out, vowing revenge, but I can't imagine he'd go so far as murder. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with interest. A heated exchange, she said. And Clara, the maid, how did she fit into the household? Clara is efficient, if reserved, Evelyn said. She keeps to herself, does her work. Harold hired her a year ago, after she left Mr. Baxter's employ. I never asked why she left there. It wasn't my place. Miss Marple filed this away, recalling the vicar's wife's mention of Clara's abrupt departure from Baxter's household. And last night, she said, you're certain you heard nothing? No footsteps, no voices. Evelyn met her gaze, her expression unwavering. Nothing. The house is old, but solid. Sound doesn't carry far, especially from the parlour to my room upstairs. Craddock closed his notebook. Thank you, Mrs. Grayson. We may need to speak again, but for now, we'll leave you in peace. Evelyn rose, her poise intact. I want this resolved, Inspector, for Harold's sake. If there's anything I can do, you have only to ask. As they left the drawing room, Miss Marple paused by the photograph, her fingers brushing the frame. Such a fine portrait, she said, almost to herself. But it tells only half the story, doesn't it? Evelyn's smile faltered, but she said nothing, escorting them to the door. Outside, the air was crisp, the sky streaked with pink and gold. Craddock offered Miss Marple his arm, which she accepted this time, her steps slower as her mind raced. Well, he asked as they reached the car, what did you make of her? Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Mrs. Grayson is a woman of control, Inspector. Her grief is real, I think, but it's tempered by something else, fear, perhaps, or calculation. She spoke of love, but her words lacked warmth. And that moment of unease when I mentioned the scarf. She knows more than she says, though whether it's guilt or merely a secret, I cannot yet tell. Craddock nodded, starting the engine. She's hiding something, I agree. But motive, opportunity. She was in the house, but her story holds for now. Stories always hold until they don't, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but firm. Evelyn Grayson is like a book with pages glued shut. We must find a way to open them. And Baxter's outburst last week bears looking into. A man who threatens ruin may not stop at words. As they drove back to the village, Miss Marple gazed out at the passing hedgerows, her mind weaving the threads of the case. Evelyn's composure, the photograph's forced smiles, the mention of Clara's past with Baxter were fragments of a larger pattern. She thought of a young woman in St. Mary Mead years ago, whose calm exterior had hidden a desperate heart. People, she knew, were rarely what they seemed, and Evelyn Grayson was no exception. Back at her cottage, Lily was waiting with a pot of tea and a fresh batch of scones. Any news, miss? She asked, her eyes eager. Only threads, Lily, Miss Marple said, settling into her armchair. But threads, when pulled, can unravel the tightest knots. Now, tell me, has the village said anything more about Mrs. Grayson's habits? Her letters, perhaps, or visitors? Lily's face lit up, delighted to contribute. Well, miss, the postmistress mentioned Mrs. Grayson sends letters to London regular like, always to the same address. No return name, just initials. And old Mrs. Bantry saw her walking by the river last month, looking ever so thoughtful, like she was carrying a weight. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes narrowing. Letters and solitary walks, she murmured. Small things, but they may lead somewhere. Tomorrow, Inspector Craddock will speak to Mr. Reed. I shall be there, Lily, and I shall listen. For in listening, one hears the truth. As the fire crackled in the grate, Miss Marple picked up her knitting, her needles resuming their steady rhythm. The case was like her wooler tangle at first, but with care it would form a pattern. Evelyn Grayson was one thread, bright and delicate, but whether she was victim, bystander, or something darker, only time would reveal. Chapter 4. The loyal clerk. The morning mist clung to the lanes of St. Mary Mead, softening the outlines of the village's cottages as Miss Jane Marple made her way to Harold Grayson's office, a modest brick building tucked behind the high street. Her umbrella, more a precaution than a necessity, tapped lightly against the cobblestones, its rhythm matching the quiet churn of her thoughts. The interview with Evelyn Grayson had left her with a sense of uneasy widow's composure to polished, a flicker of fear to quickly masked. Now, as she approached the office where Thomas Reed, Grayson's clerk, awaited questioning, Miss Marple felt the case tightening, like a skein of wool drawn taut before the needle. Inspector Craddock was already there, his car parked beside a hawthorn hedge. He greeted her with a nod, his face etched with the weariness of a man who had spent the night poring over reports. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, holding the door open. "Reed's inside, nervous as a cat. He's been cooperative, but I've a feeling he's holding something back. Your presence might loosen his tongue." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes bright beneath the brim of her hat. "Nervous young men often reveal more than they intend, Inspector. Let us see what Mr. Reed has to say." The office was a stark contrast to Willow House's opulence, its walls lined with filing cabinets and shelves of ledgers, the air heavy with the scent of ink and dust. A single window, streaked with morning dew, let in a pale light that fell across a cluttered desk. Thomas Reed stood by it, his thin frame hunched slightly, his spectacles slipping down his nose as he adjusted a stack of papers with trembling hands. He was a young man, not yet 30, with a pallor that suggested long hours indoors and a habit of worrying. His suit, though neat, was frayed at the cuffs, and his tie was slightly askew, as if tied in haste. "Mr. Reed," Craddock began, settling into a chair while Miss Marple took another, her hands folded over her handbag. "We need to go over your movements on the night Mr. Grayson died. You've said you left Willow House at 7 after working on accounts, correct?" Reed nodded, pushing his spectacles up. "Yes, sir. Mr. Grayson and I reviewed the ledger shipments from Bombay, mostly. He was in good spirits, said the deal would put us ahead of, well, competitors. I finished my notes, and he told me to go. I locked the office here and went to the Blue Boar by 8. Miss Marple's gaze was gentle but unyielding, like a grandmother assessing a wayward child. "And you saw no one else at Willow House? Not Mrs. Grayson, nor Clara, the maid?" "No, ma'am," Reed said, his voice high and quick. "Mrs. Grayson was upstairs, I think. Clara brought tea earlier, but she'd gone to the kitchen by the time I left. It was just Mr. Grayson in the parlour, working at his desk. Craddock flipped open his notebook. The landlord at the Blue Boar confirms you were there from 8 until 10, playing darts with the locals. Anyone walk you home? Reed shook his head, his fingers twisting a pencil. No, sir, I live above the baker's, not far. I was in bed by 10:30, alone. Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice soft as a breeze. You must have been very devoted to Mr. Grayson, Mr. Reed. Such long hours, such meticulous work. He relied on you, I imagine, for the details that made his business thrive. Reed's cheeks flushed, and he looked down at the desk. He was a good employer, ma'am. Demanding, yes, but fair. He trusted me with the accounts, the correspondence, everything short of signing the contracts. I owed him a great deal. Owed, Miss Marple repeated, her tone curious, but edged with something sharper. That's an interesting word, Mr. Reed. Did you feel indebted to him, perhaps in ways that weighed heavily? The clerk's eyes darted up, a flash of alarm crossing his face. I only meant he gave me a chance, ma'am. I came from nothing, a grocer's son, no prospects. Mr. Grayson saw potential in me. I worked hard to prove him right. Craddock leaned forward, his voice firm. Let's talk about those accounts. We've looked at the ledgers from Willow House. There's an entry, a large payment, no explanation, dated a week ago. Your handwriting. Reed, care to enlighten us. Reed's hand froze on the pencil, and a bead of sweat glistened at his temple. A payment. I'd need to see the ledger, sir. I make hundreds of entries. It could be a supplier, a debt-settled Mr. Grayson didn't always share the details. Miss Marple's needles, imaginary in this setting, but ever present in her mind, seemed to click as she watched him. A clerk of your precision, Mr. Reed, would surely notice an unusual sum. Was Mr. Grayson in the habit of making payments you didn't understand? Reed swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Sometimes, ma'am, he dealt with sensitive matters. Suppliers in the East, you know they can be particular. He'd tell me to record a sum and ask no questions. I did as I was told. Craddock's eyes narrowed. And you never wondered if these sensitive matters involved trouble, Grayson? Had enemies Baxter, for one. Did you ever hear them argue? Reed hesitated, then nodded. Once, sir, last week, Mr. Baxter came to the office here, shouting about a contract Grayson won. Said it was unfair that Grayson had bribed someone. Mr. Grayson laughed it off, told him to take it up with the courts. Baxter left, red in the face. Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her mind was threading connections. And how did Mr. Grayson seem after that encounter? Was he concerned or dismissive? Dismissive, Reed said, his voice steadier now. He said, Baxter was all bluster, no substance. A man who yells hasn't the nerve to act, he told me. Then he went back to his letters. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her voice as gentle as a lullaby. You admired him, didn't you, Mr. Reed? His confidence, his success. But such men can be hard to serve. Did you ever feel overlooked? Perhaps a young man of your talents hoped for more recognition, a share in the profits. Reed's face paled, and he pushed his spectacles up again, a nervous tick. I was content, ma'am. Mr. Grayson promised me a raise next year, maybe a partnership one day. I had no reason to wish him harm. Craddock closed his notebook with a snap. That's all for now, Reed. Don't leave the village without informing me. We may need to speak again. Reed nodded, his shoulders slumping as if released from a vice. "Yes, sir, I'll be here, at the office or my rooms." As they left the office, Miss Marple paused by the door, her eyes lingering on a shelf where a small silk sample, folded neatly, caught the light. It was not unlike the scarf that had ended Grayson's life, though smaller, a remnant perhaps. "Inspector," she said quietly, "might we take a closer look at that sample?" Craddock retrieved it, holding it up. The silk was soft, its weave tight, its color a deep crimson. "One of Grayson's imports," he said. "Reed must handle these daily." "Indeed," Miss Marple murmured. "And handling silk, one learns its strength, its give. A useful knowledge, perhaps, for tying knots." They stepped into the street, where the mist was lifting, revealing the village in sharp clarity. Craddock offered to drive her home, but Miss Marple declined, preferring the walk. "The air sharpens the mind, Inspector," she said, her smile wry. "And I have much to ponder." As Craddock drove off, Miss Marple set out, her umbrella tapping a steady beat. Thomas Reed's nervousness, his quick denials, his loyalty tinged with something unspoken, they were threads in the tapestry of the case. She recalled a young man in St. Mary Mead, years ago, who had served a demanding employer with devotion, only to harbour a quiet resentment that festered into betrayal. Reed's position, so close to Grayson's power yet subordinate, could breed such feelings. And that unexplained payment blackmail, a bribe, or something else. It was a knot to untie. The village was stirring now, shopkeepers sweeping there. Steps, children darting through the lanes. At the post office, Miss Marple paused to exchange pleasantries with the postmistress, who, as expected, had a tidbit to share. "That Mr. Reed," she said, leaning over the counter, "he's been sending letters to London lately, addressed to some firm. Legal, I reckon, from the look of the envelope." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind adding this to the pattern. Letters, like Evelyn's, suggested connections beyond the village ambitions, perhaps, or secrets. She continued home, where Lily awaited with tea and a fresh wave of gossip. "They're saying at the grocer's that Mr. Reed was seen at the Blue Boar last week, looking proper upset," Lily reported. "Drank more than usual, he did." Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting in hand. "Upset, was he?" she said, her needles clicking. "A young man with burdens, perhaps. Tomorrow, Inspector Craddock will see Mr. Baxter. I shall be there, Lily, to listen and to watch, for in watching one sees the truth." As the fire glowed, Miss Marple's thoughts wove through the case. Reed's loyalty was a facade, she suspected, hiding a crack ambition, fear, or something darker. The silk sample, the payment, the letters, they were clues, small but sharp, like the pins in her sewing basket. With patience, she would stitch them together, revealing the pattern of Harold. Grayson's murder. Chapter 5. The rival's ambition. The sun climbed higher over St. Mary Mead, burnishing the village in a golden haze as Miss Jane Marple set out for Lionel Baxter's residence, a sprawling manor on the outskirts known as Thornfield Hall. Her navy coat was buttoned against the morning's chill, and her sensible shoes crunched on the gravel path, each step measured but purposeful. The interview with Thomas Reed had left her with a sense of threads converging his nervous deflections, the unexplained payment, the silk sample glinting like a warning. Now, as she approached the home of Grayson's rival, her mind was alert, sifting through the villagers' whispers about Baxter's losses and his fiery temper. Inspector Craddock waited by the gate, his face set in a frown. Baxter's not. The most welcoming sort, he said, opening the car door for her. He agreed to see us, but he's already blustering about being a suspect. I'm counting on you to spot what's beneath the noise. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with quiet resolve. Noise, Inspector, often hides the softest secrets. Mr. Baxter's bluster may tell us more than his words. Thornfield Hall was a study in faded grandeur, its red brick facade weathered, its lawns dotted with unkempt patches where roses grew wild. The front door, flanked by stone urns, creaked open to reveal a housekeeper, Mrs. Pollard, her grey hair pulled tight and her expression sour. "Mr. Baxter's in the study," she said, her voice clipped. "He's expecting you, but he's not best pleased." They followed her through a hall lined with hunting prints and tarnished silver, the air thick with the scent of old wood and pipe smoke. The study was a masculine domain, dark paneling, a massive desk strewn with papers, and shelves crowded with books on trade and commerce. Lionel Baxter stood by a window, his broad shoulders filling a tweed jacket, his ruddy face turned toward the garden. He was a man in his 50s, robust and imposing, with a shock of iron-grey hair and eyes that glinted with barely contained irritation. "Inspector Craddock," he boomed, turning to face them, "and Miss Marple, I presume. I'll not mince words, this is a damned impertinence, hauling me into your inquiries like some common criminal. Grayson's dead, and I'm sorry for it, but I had no hand in it." Craddock remained unruffled, gesturing to a pair of leather chairs. "We're not accusing you, Mr. Baxter. We're gathering facts. Please, sit. Miss Marple's here to assist, and we'd appreciate your cooperation." Baxter snorted, but complied, sinking into a chair with a grunt. Miss Marple settled opposite, her hands resting on her handbag, her gaze steady but unintrusive, like a birdwatcher observing a restless hawk. She noted the room's details: a decanter of whiskey on a sideboard, half empty, a stack of unpaid bills peeking from a drawer, and, on the desk, a folded silk sample, its emerald hue catching the light. It was not unlike Grayson's stock, she thought, though coarser, as if from a lesser supplier. "Let's start with your movements," Craddock said, opening his notebook. "Where were you the night Grayson died?" "Between 7 and 10. Baxter's jaw tightened, but he answered readily. "At home, here. I dined at 6. Alone, Mrs. Pollard can vouch for that. Spent the evening in this study, going over accounts. Went to bed around 11. No visitors, no outings." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice soft as a whisper of silk. "A quiet evening, Mr. Baxter. Yet I understand you and Mr. Grayson were hardly on quiet terms. The village speaks of a rivalry, one that grew heated of late. Could you share your side of it?" Baxter's eyes narrowed, but he leaned back, folding his arms. "Rivalry, aye, that's a polite word for it. Grayson was a shark, Miss Marple, gobbling up contracts that should have been mine. He undercut my prices, poached my suppliers last month. He snatched a deal with a Calcutta firm I'd spent years cultivating. Cost me thousands. I won't pretend I liked him, but murder, that's a fool's game, and I'm no fool." Craddock jotted a note. "You argued with him last week, at his office. Reed overheard you, said you accused Grayson of bribery. Care to elaborate?" Baxter's face reddened, and he slammed a fist on the desk, making the silk sample quiver. "Damned right I did. Grayson played dirty, offered kickbacks to that Calcutta supplier, I'm sure of it. I went to confront him, demand proof. He laughed in my face, said I was finished and should sell up. I told him he'd regret crossing me, but it was words, Inspector Hot Air, nothing more. Miss Marple's expression remained serene, though her mind was threading connections. Words can be sharp, Mr. Baxter, she said gently, and you're a man of action, I think, used to fighting for your place. Did you ever visit Willow House, perhaps to press your case further? Baxter's gaze flickered, a momentary pause before he answered. I've been to Willow House, yes, 4 business months ago, not recently. Grayson preferred his office for our spats, kept his home private, or so he thought. His tone held a hint of scorn, as if Grayson's privacy was a pretense. Craddock pressed on. Your housekeeper says you were here all evening, but she's elderly, hard of hearing. Can anyone else confirm your whereabouts? Baxter's scowl deepened. Mrs. Pollard's word is enough. She saw me at dinner, checked on me later. I don't keep a house full of spies to track my movements, Inspector. Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the silk sample, her voice as light as a breeze. That's a fine piece of silk on your desk, Mr. Baxter. From your own trade, I presume. You must know the material well, its strength, its uses. Baxter glanced at the sample, his fingers brushing it absently. Aye, it's mine. Not as fine as Grayson's, I'll grant, but good enough. I've handled silk for 30 years, know it like my own skin. What of it? Only that the scarf used to kill Mr. Grayson was silk, Miss Marple said, her tone deceptively mild. A strong material, when knotted with skill. You'd know how to tie such a knot, I imagine. Baxter's face darkened, and he leaned forward, his voice low. See here, Miss Marple, I'll not have you twisting my words. Yes, I know silk, and yes, I despised Grayson, but I didn't strangle him. I was here, minding my own business, while someone else did your dirty work. Craddock intervened, his tone firm. No one's twisting anything, Mr. Baxter. We're exploring possibilities. Did Grayson ever mention threats, enemies, anyone who might have wanted him dead? Baxter hesitated, then shrugged. He didn't confide in me, but he had a knack for making enemies. Suppliers he squeezed, rivals he crushed even, his own people might have turned on him. Reed, that clerk of his, was always skulking about, eager to please, but sharp-eyed, and his wife pretty, but cold as ice. I'd look closer to home, Inspector. Miss Marple noted the deflection, her mind filing away Baxter's jab at Evelyn and Reed. And Clara Dunn, she said, almost as an afterthought. She worked for you once, I believe, before joining the Graysons. Was she a satisfactory maid? Baxter's expression soured, and he waved a hand dismissively. Clara, she was competent, but nosy. Caught her poking through my papers once, said she was dusting, but I didn't trust her. Sacked her a year ago. Grayson hired her soon after, probably to spite me. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, a sign of a new thread caught. Nosy, she repeated softly, a curious trait in a maid. Did she ever speak of her time here, after she left? Not to me, Baxter said curtly. I've barely seen her since. She keeps her head down at Willow House, or so I hear. Craddock closed his notebook. Thank you, Mr. Baxter. We'll be in touch if we need more. Stay in the village, please. Baxter rose, his bulk filling the room. I'm not going anywhere, Inspector, but you're barking up the wrong tree. Find the real killer and leave. Honest men alone. As they left the study, Mrs. Pollard showed them out, her silence as heavy as her disapproval. Outside, the morning had warmed, the haze lifting to reveal the rolling hills beyond. Craddock offered Miss Marple his arm, which She declined with a smile. "A walk will do me good, Inspector," she said. "Mr. Baxter has given us much to consider." Craddock raised an eyebrow. "He's a hothead, no doubt, with motive to spare, but his alibi, weak as it is, holds for now. What's your take?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with quiet intensity. "Mr. Baxter is a man of pride, Inspector, and pride wounded can turn to venom. His rivalry with Grayson was more than business, it was personal, a battle of wills. That silk sample, so like Grayson's, suggests he studies his enemy closely. And his dismissal of Clara too, quick to vague. There's a history there, I think, and Clara may hold the key." Craddock nodded, starting the car. "I'll check into Clara's time here, see if Mrs. Pollard knows more. Tomorrow we'll talk to the maid herself. Care to join me?" "I wouldn't miss it," Miss Marple said, her voice firm. "Clara Dunn is a shadow in this case, but shadows often hide the sharpest truths." As Craddock drove off, Miss Marple began her walk, the village unfolding before her like a familiar quilt. Baxter's temper, his losses, his knowledge of Silkthay, were strands in the web, each pulling her closer to the center. She recalled a merchant in St. Mary Mead, long ago, whose rivalry with a neighbor had ended in sabotage, not murder, but the passion was the same. Baxter's bluster, she suspected, masked a deeper calculation, and Clara's departure from his household was no mere footnote at the village green. She paused to chat with the grocer, who mentioned Baxter's recent debts, whispered about at the bank. "He's been selling off land," the grocer confided. Grayson's deals hit him hard. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind weaving the new thread into place. Back at her cottage, Lily greeted her with tea and a fresh rumour. "They say Mr. Baxter was seen near Willow House last month, Miss, arguing with Grayson in the garden." Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting in hand. "Near Willow House," she murmured, her needles clicking. "A man so close, yet claiming distance. Tomorrow, Lily, we meet Clara Dunn. I shall listen, and I shall see, for in seeing, one finds the pattern." The case was a tapestry, its colours dark and tangled, but Miss Marple knew that with care the design would emerge, revealing the hand that had knotted Grayson's fate. Chapter 6. The silent maid. The morning air in St. Mary Mead carried a crisp edge, the kind that sharpened the senses and made the village's colours red brick. Green hedgerows, golden thatch stand out as if painted anew. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in a woolen shawl, walked the short distance to Willow House, her mind a quiet whirl of threads from the case. Lionel Baxter's bluster, his veiled resentment, and his curious link to Clara Dunn had added new strands to the tapestry of Harold Grayson's murder. Now, as she prepared to meet the maid herself, Miss Marple felt the pattern shifting, like a kaleidoscope turning to reveal a hidden design. Inspector Craddock met her at the gate, his overcoat buttoned against the chill. "Clara Dunn's waiting." "In the kitchen," he said, his breath visible in the cool air. "She's agreed to talk, but she's skittish, barely said a word when I saw her yesterday. I'm hoping you'll get through to her, Miss Marple. You've a way with the quiet ones." Miss Marple's eyes crinkled with a faint smile. "Quiet ones, Inspector, often carry the loudest secrets. Let us see what Miss Dunn reveals." They entered Willow House through the servants' entrance, a narrow door that led to a stone-flagged passage smelling of soap and boiled cabbage. The kitchen was warm, its copper pots gleaming on a rack, a fire crackling in the range. Clara Dunn stood by a scrubbed oak table, her slight figure almost lost in a starched apron. She was a young woman, perhaps 22, with pale skin, mousy hair pinned tightly back, and eyes that darted like a trapped bird's. Her hands twisted a damp cloth, and she bobbed a curtsy as they approached, though her gaze remained fixed. On the floor, "Good morning, Clara," Craddock said, pulling out a chair for Miss Marple before taking one himself. "We need to talk about the night Mr. Grayson died. No need to be nervous, just tell us what you know." Clara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir, I'll do my best." Miss Marple settled into her chair, her hands resting lightly on her handbag, her expression one of kindly interest. She noted Clara's posture, shoulders hunched, fingers gripping the cloth as if it were a lifeline. The kitchen, though orderly, held signs of Clara's presence: a neatly darned tea towel, a small bunch of lavender tucked into a jar. Small touches, Miss Marple thought, that spoke of a girl trying to carve out a space in a grand house. "Let's start with your movements," Craddock said, his notebook open. "You served dinner to Mr. and Mrs. Grayson at 7, correct? What happened after that?" Clara's eyes flicked up briefly, then down again. "I cleared the table, sir, and washed up. Mr. Grayson went to his parlour, like always. Mrs. Grayson went upstairs. I finished my chores, sweeping the hall, checking the fires, then went to my room in the attic by 8:30. I didn't come down till morning, when I found him." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. "It must have been a dreadful shock, my dear, finding Mr. Grayson like that. Can you tell us exactly what you saw?" Clara's hands tightened on the cloth, her knuckles whitening. "He was in his armchair, ma'am, by the fire. His head was back, and that scarf, it was round his neck, so tight it looked part of him. I thought he was asleep at first, but then I saw his eyes open, staring. I screamed and ran for Mrs. Grayson. She came down, and we sent for the doctor." Craddock jotted a note. "You didn't touch anything? The scarf? The door?" "No, sir," Clara said quickly. "I didn't go near him after I saw what it was. The door was locked. Ty had to fetch the spare key from the hall table to get in. Mrs. Grayson was shaking, told me to stay calm." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, catching the detail. "The spare key, Clara. Was it always kept on the hall table?" Clara hesitated, her cheeks flushing faintly. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Grayson liked the parlour locked when he worked late. The spare was there for me or Mrs. Grayson, in case we needed to get in. I put it back after." Craddock glanced at Miss Marple, his expression sharpening. "And you're sure the door was locked when you found him? No chance it was open, or the key in the lock?" Clara shook her head, her voice firmer now. "Locked. Sir, I tried the handle first, like always, to see if he needed the fire stoked. It wouldn't budge." Miss Marple's mind was weaving, the spare key a new thread in the locked room puzzle. "You're very thorough, Clara," she said, her tone encouraging. "A maid's work requires sharp eyes. Did you notice anything unusual that evening? Before you went to bed? A sound, perhaps, or a visitor?" Clara's gaze dropped again, and her fingers resumed their twisting. "No, ma'am. The house was quiet. I heard Mr. Grayson's pen scratching when I passed the parlour door, but that was all. No visitors, not after Mr. Reed left at 7. Craddock leaned forward. "You saw Reed leave. Did he seem himself, or was he agitated?" Clara paused, as if choosing her words. "He was hurried, sir. Said good night to me in the hall, but he was pulling on his coat like he couldn't wait to go. I thought he was just tired. Mr. Grayson kept him late often. Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her mind was alert. And Mrs. Grayson, she said, how was she that evening? A young wife, alone in such a big house, did she seem content? Clara's eyes flickered with something caution, perhaps, or reluctance. She was quiet, ma'am, like always, kept to her room after dinner. I took her a tray of tea at 8, and she was reading, looking out the window. She thanked me, but she didn't say much. Miss Marple nodded, filing away the image of Evelyn, solitary and pensive. You've been with the Graysons a year, I understand, she said. Before that, you worked for Mr. Baxter at Thornfield Hall. Why did you leave his employ? Clara's face paled, and her hands stilled, the cloth dropping to the table. It wasn't a good fit, ma'am. Mr. Baxter was strict, and I made a mistake. He caught me looking at some papers in his study dusting. But he thought I was prying. He let me go the next day. Miss Marple's voice was soft, almost maternal. Prying is a strong word, Clara. Were you curious about his papers, perhaps? A young girl in a grand house, it's natural to wonder about the lives you serve. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. I wasn't spying, ma'am, I swear. I was dusting and the papers fell. I picked them up and he came in, shouting. I was glad to leave, truth be told. He's a hard man, Mr. Baxter. Craddock's pencil paused, his gaze sharpening. Did Baxter ever speak of Grayson while you worked for him? Any threats? Any plans to get even? Clara shook her head, her voice barely audible. He grumbled about Mr. Grayson. Sir called him a cheat, said he'd ruin him one day. But it was talk, like men do. I never heard him plan anything wrong. Miss Marple watched her closely, noting the tremor in her voice, the way her eyes avoided theirs. You're frightened, aren't you, Clara? She said gently. Not just of this tragedy, but of something else. You can tell us, my dear. We're here to find the truth, not to judge. Clara's lips parted, as if a confession trembled. On the edge, but she pressed them shut, shaking her head. I'm not frightened, ma'am, just upset. Mr. Grayson was kind to me, gave me a place after Mr. Baxter. I don't know who'd do this to him. Craddock closed his notebook, his tone firm but kind. All right, Clara, that's enough for now. If you remember anything I'll come to me or Miss Marple. You're not in trouble, but we need the full picture. Clara nodded, her hands resuming their nervous twisting. Yes, sir, I'll try. As they rose to leave, Miss Marple paused by the table, her fingers brushing the lavender jar. A lovely touch, Clara, she said. It reminds me of home. You've a gift for making things homely, even in such a grand place. Clara's face softened, a fleeting smile breaking through. Thank you, ma'am. It's just a bit of lavender from the garden. Outside, the morning had warmed, the mist giving way to a clear sky. Craddock offered to drive, but Miss Marple, as ever, preferred to walk. Clara's silence speaks volumes, Inspector, she said as they parted. She's hiding something, not guilt, I think, but fear. Her time with Baxter left a mark, and that business with the papers, it's more than a maid's mistake. Craddock nodded, his face thoughtful. She's scared, no doubt. And that spare key in the hall, anyone could have used it if they knew it was there. I'll have the lock checked for tampering, just in case. Do, Miss Marple said, her voice firm. and ask Mrs. Pollard at Thornfield about Clara's dismissal. Servants see more than their masters think, and she may know what Clara won't say. Craddock tipped his hat. Tomorrow we'll review the ledgers more closely. Care to join me at the station? I shall be there, Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming. Clara Dunn is a puzzle, Inspector, but puzzles yield to patience. As Craddock drove off, Miss Marple began her walk. The village waking around her, shopkeepers opening shutters, a milk cart rattling by. At the vicarage she paused to greet the vicar's wife, who had a fresh tidbit. Clara was seen crying in the churchyard last week. Miss Marple looked ever so distressed, poor thing. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind weaving the new thread. Back at her cottage, Lily was ready with tea and gossip. They say Clara's been sending letters to her sister in London, Miss, full of worries about her place here. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting in hand. Worries, she murmured, her needles clicking. A maid with secrets, caught between two masters. Tomorrow, Lily, we delve into the ledgers. I shall watch, and I shall listen, for in listening one hears the heart of the matter. The case was a knot, intricate and tight, but Miss Marple knew that with care the strands would loosen, revealing the hand that had silenced Harold Grayson forever. Chapter 7. Threads of Motive. The afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished floorboards. The fire in the grate crackled softly, its warmth a counterpoint to the chill that lingered in her thoughts. Seated in her favourite armchair, a cup of tea cooling on the table beside her, Miss Marple's knitting lay untouched in her lap. Her hands, usually busy with needles, were still, her fingers laced as her mind wove through the threads of Harold Grayson's murder. The interviews with Evelyn Grayson, Thomas Reed, Lionel Baxter, and Clara Dunn had each added a strand to the case, but the pattern remained elusive. Like a tapestry viewed in half-light, Lily bustled in with a fresh pot of tea, her eyes bright with the villagers' latest whispers. They're saying at the butcher's that Mr. Grayson owed money to some rough types in London. Miss, she said, setting the pot down, debts from his early days, before he made his fortune. Could that be why he was killed? Miss Marple, lips curved in a faint smile, her eyes distant. Debts make a fine motive, Lily, but they're like gossip, often exaggerated. We must focus on what we know, not what the village fancies. Now, be a dear and fetch my notebook from the bureau. As Lily scurried off, Miss Marple leaned back, her gaze drifting to the window where a black bird hopped along the sill. The case was a puzzle, its pieces scattered across Willow House and beyond. Evelyn's guarded composure, Reed's nervous deflections, Baxter's simmering rage, and Clara's fearful silence. Each suspect carried a motive, but none yet fit the locked parlour's mystery. The spare key Clara mentioned, kept on the hall table, was a tantalizing clue, suggesting access to anyone familiar with the house. Yet the scarf's intricate knot, the absence of struggle, and the locked door pointed to a killer both cunning and intimate with Grayson's world. Lily returned with the notebook, a small leather-bound volume where Miss Marple jotted observations in her neat, spidery hand. "Will you be writing up the case?" Miss Lily asked, lingering by the table, sorting it. Lily, Miss Marple corrected, opening the notebook. "A case is like wool, tangled at first, but with care the strands align. Sit a moment, if you like. It helps to talk things through." Lily perched on a stool, her apron smoothed over her knees, eager to be part of the detective's process. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her voice low and measured as she began to unravel her thoughts. Let us consider the suspects, one by one, and see where their motives lead us. Mrs. Grayson, first Evelyn, so young and poised, yet distant in her grief. The village whispers of a marriage strained by Grayson's ambition. She was in the house that night, alone in her room, or so she says. A wife might resent a husband's control, might seek freedom through drastic means. But her hands, lily delicate, unmarked, suggest no struggle, no strength to overpower a man like Grayson. Lily nodded, her eyes wide. She's a lady, miss, not one for rough work. But could she have planned it, maybe with someone else? Possibility, Miss Marple conceded, her pen tapping the notebook. Evelyn's letters to London, mentioned by the postmistress, hint at connections beyond St. Mary Mead. A confidant, perhaps, or a scheme. We must learn more of her correspondence. Now, Thomas Reed, the clerk so loyal, yet so nervous. His position under Grayson was secure, but ambition can chafe in a young man. That unexplained payment in the ledger, in his handwriting, is troubling. Was it a mistake, as he claims, or something darker, blackmail, theft, or a bribe he facilitated? He's a quiet one, Lily offered. My cousin saw him at the Blue Boar last week, drinking alone, looking like he'd lost his best friend. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Grief or guilt, Lily. Reed's alibi at the pub holds, but he left Willow House at 7, giving him time to return unseen. His knowledge of Grayson's habits, his access to the office and its secrets, makes him a figure to watch. And then there's Lionel Baxter, the rival. His motive is plain as day. Grayson's deals ruined him, and his temper, as we saw, is a spark to tinder. His alibi rests on a half-deaf housekeeper, and his familiarity with silk could explain the scarf's knot, yet his bluster feels theatrical, as if hiding a colder calculation. Lily leaned forward, her voice hushed. They say Mr. Baxter's been selling off his horses. Short of money, he is, since Grayson took that big contract. Money, Miss Marple murmured, jotting a note. A powerful spur. Baxter's losses give him reason to strike, but would he risk murder in Grayson's own home? He knew Willow House, having visited before. Perhaps he knew of the spare key, or a window's weakness. We must check his movements more closely. And finally, Clara Dunn, the maid, so silent, so frightened. Her fear is not just of the murder, I think, but of something older, tied to her time with Baxter. She was sacked for prying, he said, but what did she see? Her access to the house, her knowledge of its rhythms, make her a shadow in this case, one that may cast light if we press gently. Lily shivered, though the fire was warm. Clara's a queer one. My friend at the dairy says she keeps to herself, never joins the other maids at the market, like she's got something to hide, or something to protect, Miss Marple said, her pen pausing. Clara's mention of the spare key was telling, too quick, as if rehearsed. She knows more than she says, but fear seals her lips. We must find what binds her to Baxter, and why she guards it. She turned a page in her notebook, sketching a rough timeline. Grayson, alive at 7, Red leaving, Evelyn upstairs by 8, Clara in her attic by 8:30, death between 8 and 10. The locked parlour door, the key in Grayson's pocket, the spare on the hall table lit, was a riddle, but not insoluble. The door is the heart of it, she said, almost to herself. Locked from the inside, yet the killer escaped. A trick. Lily, like a conjurer's act. The spare key could lock the door from outside, if the killer took it and returned it later. Or perhaps a window, latched but not secure. Lily's eyes widened. A window, missed, but the inspector said they were all fastened tight. So he did, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but firm. But latches can be tampered with, or left unfastened by design. I recall a case in St. Mary Mead, years ago, a burglary where a window was latched after the thief entered to fool the police. We must ask the blacksmith if he's repaired any windows at Willow House lately. Lily clapped her hands, delighted by the sleuthing. You're like a detective in a story. Miss, what's next then? Miss Marple smiled, picking up her knitting at last, the needles resuming their familiar click. Next, Lily, we dig deeper. Inspector Craddock will examine the ledgers tomorrow, and I shall be there to study them. Grayson's business holds secrets, deals, debts, enemies, and we must learn more of Clara's time with Baxter and Evelyn's letters. Each thread pulls us closer to the truth. As Lily cleared the tea things, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to a memory of village girl, long ago, whose silence had shielded a lover's crime. Clara's fear, Evelyn's reserve, Reed's unease, Baxter's rage, they were human, all too human, and in their flaws lay the answer. She opened her notebook again, adding a single line, the scarf Y left behind. A taunt, a mistake, or a message. The fire settled, its glow softening the room. Outside, St. Mary Mead was quiet, the village asleep under a blanket of stars. But Miss Marple's mind was awake, turning over the case like a jeweller inspecting a flawed gem. The motives were clear: resentment, ambition, revenge, fear, but the means remained hidden, locked in that parlour with Grayson's final breath. She thought of the silk scarf, its beauty turned to horror, and wondered if its presence was the killer's signature, a clue to their mind. Lily, she called, as the maid reached the door, before you go, ask your friend at the dairy if Clara ever spoke of Mr. Baxter after leaving his employ. Even a word could matter. Lily nodded, her face serious. I will, miss, and I'll keep my ears open at the market tomorrow. Miss Marple's needles clicked faster, her eyes fixed on the fire. Good girl, the truth is in the details. Lily's maul, sharp, like the stitches in a seam. We shall find them, and they shall lead us to the killer. As Lily left, Miss Marple returned to her notebook, her pen tracing the suspects' names. Evelyn, Reed, Baxter, Clara. Each had a motive, each had opportunity, but only one had woven the scarf into a noose. The locked door was a challenge, but Miss Marple had faced such challenges before, with patience, observation, and a touch of village wisdom. She would unravel the knot, revealing the hand that had ended Harold Grayson's life. Chapter 8. The merchant's secrets. The morning sun cast a pale glow over St. Mary Mead, its light filtering through the mist that clung to the village like a gossamer veil. Miss Jane Marple sat at the small desk in the police station's back room, a cup of station tea strong and slightly bitter cooling beside her. The room was cramped, its walls lined with filing cabinets and a single map of the county, but it was quiet, a haven for the work ahead. Inspector Craddock had spread Harold Grayson's ledgers across the desk, their leather covers worn from years of handling. The air smelled of ink and old paper, and Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, were already scanning the pages as Craddock outlined his findings. These came from Willow House yesterday, he said, tapping a ledger. Grayson, business record shipments, contracts, payments. Most of it's routine, but there are anomalies we can't ignore. That payment Reed couldn't explain as one, and there's a pattern of aggressive deals that made Grayson enemies. I'm hoping you'll spot something I've missed, Miss Marple. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. Ledgers, Inspector, are like letters full of secrets if one reads between the lines. Let us see what Mr. Grayson's numbers reveal. She adjusted her shawl and leaned forward, her fingers tracing the columns of figures in Grayson's bold hand, interspersed with Thomas Reed's neater annotations. The ledgers detailed a silk empire built on ambition and ruthlessness, shipments from Bombay, Shanghai, and Damascus, each tied to contracts that undercut competitors. Grayson's success was clear, but so was his method squeezing suppliers, delaying payments, and outbidding rivals like Lionel Baxter. Miss Marple's mind, as ever, drew parallels to St. Mary Mead, where a grocer's sharp practices had once alienated half the village. Grayson's wealth, she suspected, came at a cost in loyalty and trust. Her attention fixed on the payment Craddock had mentioned, dated 10 days before Grayson's death, £500, a substantial sum, recorded by Reed with no recipient named, only the cryptic note per HG in the margin. "This is curious," she said, her voice soft but firm. "A payment of this size, undocumented, suggests discretion, perhaps blackmail, or a bribe to secure a deal. Mr. Reed's claim of ignorance seems convenient." Craddock nodded, his pencil poised. "I pressed him on it, but he stuck to his story, said Grayson handled some payments privately. I'm having the bank trace it, but that'll take time. Any thoughts on what it could mean?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with quiet intensity. "It could mean many things, Inspector. If Grayson was blackmailed, the payer might be our killer, silencing a threat. If it was a bribe, it points to the Calcutta contract Baxter lost. Perhaps a supplier was swayed, or it could be theft, with Reed covering his tracks. We must learn who received this money and why." She turned to another ledger, its pages detailing the Calcutta deal, finalized a month ago. Grayson's notes were triumphant, boasting of a monopoly on a rare silk strain. But Reed's annotations hinted at friction, a supplier's complaint, a delayed shipment, and a curt order from Grayson to handle it. Miss Marple's fingers paused on the page. "This contract was Grayson's triumph, but Baxter's ruin," she said. "It gave Baxter motive, but also others, suppliers perhaps, or even Red. If he was caught in the crossfire of Grayson's demands." Craddock rubbed his chin, his face thoughtful. "Baxter's name keeps coming up. His losses were public land sales, even his horses gone. And he knew Grayson's business inside out, having competed for years. Could he have slipped into Willow House, used that spare key Clara mentioned?" "Possibly," Miss Marple said, her tone measured. "But we must not fix on Baxter alone. The spare key is a thread, but so is the locked door. The killer entered, killed, and locked the parlour without leaving a trace except the scarf. Why? Leave it, Inspector. A mistake or a message?" Craddock frowned, flipping through his notes. "I've been wondering that myself. The scarf was Grayson's own stock. Clara confirmed it. Leaving it could point to someone in the trade, Baxter, or even Reed, who handled samples daily. But it feels deliberate, like a taunt." Miss Marple's needles, imagined in her mind, clicked as she pondered. A taunt or a distraction. The scarf draws our eye, but the door hides the trick. "I keep thinking of the windows, Inspector. You said they were latched, but latches can be manipulated. The blacksmith may know something. Has he been asked?" Craddock made a note. "Not yet, but I'll send a constable to check." "You think the killer came through a window?" locked the door with the spare, and left the same way. It's one possibility, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but certain. The spare key Clara mentioned was on the hall table, accessible to anyone in the house Sevelin, Clara, or a visitor who knew its place. But a window, if tampered with, could explain. An outsider's entry Baxter, perhaps, or someone else we've not yet considered. She returned to the ledgers, her eyes catching a smaller entry, almost overlooked, a payment to a London solicitor, dated 2 weeks prior, for consultation. It was in Grayson's hand, not Reed's, and lacked further detail. This is interesting, she said, pointing. Grayson sought legal advice recently. A will, perhaps, or a dispute. Evelyn might know, or read, if he handled correspondence. Craddock's eyebrows rose. A will could change everything. If Grayson was altering his estate, Evelyn might have motive fear of losing her inheritance. Or Reed, if he was promised a share and saw it slipping away. Miss Marple nodded, jotting the solicitor's name in her notebook. We must inquire discreetly. A solicitor's loyalty is to the client, but a hint of murder may loosen tongues. And we should ask Evelyn about Grayson's plans. Her reaction may tell us more than her words. As they worked, a constable knocked and entered, his face flushed from a morning's patrol. Sir, we've had a report from the grocer's boy. He says he saw a cloaked figure near Willow House around 9 that night, moving toward the garden. Couldn't see the face, but it was a man, he thinks, tall and broad. Craddock's eyes sharpened. 9 o'clock right in our window of death. Did he see where the figure went? Lost sight of him near the rose bushes, sir, the constable said. Thought it was odd, but didn't report it till now, with all the talk of murder. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, a sign of a new thread caught. A cloaked figure. She murmured, Baxter is tall, and his heavy coat could pass for a cloak. But so could others read, if he returned, or even a stranger tied to Grayson's debts. The garden faces the parlour windows, does it not? It does, Craddock confirmed, making a note. I'll have the garden searched for footprints or signs of entry. That window theory of yours is looking stronger. Miss Marple turned a page, her mind weaving the new clue into the pattern. The ledgers, the key, the scarf, the cloaked figure, they were pieces of a mosaic, each sharp and distinct. She thought of Evelyn's guarded eyes, Reed's nervous tics, Baxter's rage, and Clara's fear. Each had a place in Grayson's world, and each could have crossed the line from motive to act. But the locked door remained the riddle's heart, a barrier that mocked their efforts. Inspector, she said, closing the ledger, we must also consider Grayson's character. These ledgers show a man who ruled his empire with an iron hand, alienating those around him. His wife, his clerk, his rival, his maid-all had reasons to resent him. The killer was someone he trusted, or someone bold enough to strike in his own home. The scarf suggests intimacy with his trade, but the door suggests cunning beyond a simple grudge. Craddock leaned back, his face weary but determined. You're right, Miss Marple. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was planned, down to the last knot. I'm meeting Evelyn again tomorrow to ask about that solicitor. Want to come along? I shall, Miss Marple said, her voice firm. And we must speak to the blacksmith. About those windows. Small details, Inspector, are the stitches that hold the truth together. As Craddock gathered the ledgers, Miss Marple rose, her shawl adjusted with care. The station's clock struck noon, and she declined a lift, preferring the walk home. The village has eyes, Inspector, she said, her smile wry. A stroll may yield more than we expect. Outside, St. Mary Mead was alive with the hum of daily life, children playing, a cart rattling by, the baker's boy whistling as he made deliveries. Miss Marple paused at the grocer's to thank the boy for his report, her gentle questions, coaxing a detail. The cloaked figure had carried something, perhaps a bag, slung over one shoulder. Like a poacher, ma'am, the boy said, eager to help. She continued home, her mind threading the new clue. A bag could hold tools, or evidence perhaps, the scarf itself, brought to the scene. At her cottage, Lily greeted her with a tray of scones and a fresh rumour. The vicar's wife says Mr. Grayson was planning a trip to London, miss, to meet some lawyer. Kept it quiet, he did. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resumed, the needles clicking like a metronome. A lawyer, she murmured. Another thread, Lily. Tomorrow we question Evelyn and chase the blacksmith's tale. I shall listen, and I shall see, for in seeing, one finds the shadow of the truth. The case was a labyrinth, its paths twisting through Grayson's empire and the hearts of those around him. But Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, knew that every labyrinth had a centre, and she was drawing closer, step by careful step, to the hand that had knotted the silk scarf. Chapter 9. A village revelation. The St. Mary Mead village fete was in full swing. Its cheerful clamour a stark contrast to the sombre threads of Harold Grayson's murder that occupied Miss Jane Marple's mind. The green was alive with bunting, stalls laden with jam and knitted goods, and children darting through the crowd, their laughter mingling with the strains of a local fiddler. Miss Marple, dressed in her best tweed skirt and a lavender blouse, moved among the villagers with her usual unobtrusive grace, her black handbag tucked under one arm. To the casual observer, she was merely an elderly spinster enjoying the fete, but her sharp eyes missed nothing, and her ears were tuned to the village's pulse, its gossip, its half-truths, its secrets. The case had grown more intricate with each interview, the ledger's revelations adding weight to the motives of Evelyn Grayson, Thomas Reed, Lionel Baxter, and Clara Dunn, the cloaked figure seen near Willow House, the unexplained payment, and the spare key's accessibility had tightened the web, but the locked parlour door remained a stubborn knot. Miss Marple had come to the fete not for the scones or the tombola, but for the unguarded moments when tongues loosened and truths slipped out. Villagers, she knew, were like books left open in a breeze. Pages turned by chance could reveal the heart of a story. She paused at Mrs. Price's jam stall, exchanging pleasantries while noting the postmistress, Miss Weatherby, nearby, her head bent close to the vicar's wife. Miss Marple drifted toward them, her smile benign as she complimented the vicar's wife on the church flower arrangements. Such a lovely fete, she said, her voice warm, though I dare say the village is still shaken by poor Mr. Grayson's death. Have you heard any new talk, Mrs. Clement? Mrs. Clement, ever eager to share, leaned in, her voice low. Oh, Miss Marple, it's all anyone speaks of. Miss Weatherby was just telling. Evelyn Grayson's been sending letters to London, regular as clockwork, to some address with no name, just initials. C.L., wasn't it, Miss Weatherby? The postmistress nodded, her spectacles glinting. That's right. I noticed them myself, always the same envelope, posted twice a week. I thought it odd, her being so private, but with Mr. Grayson gone, folk are wondering if it's a lover or something to do with his business. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her expression remained one of mild interest. Letters can be such personal things, she said. Perhaps a friend or family. though I suppose the village has its theories. Oh, plenty, Mrs. Clement said, her tone conspiratorial. Some say she was planning to leave Grayson, others that she's mixed up in his deals, but no one knows for sure she keeps herself. So aloof. Miss Marple nodded, filing the initials CL away. Evelyn's correspondence, mentioned before but now with a detail, suggested a secret life beyond Willow House. Was CL a confidant, a conspirator, or merely a friend? She thanked the women and moved on, her steps slow but deliberate, her mind weaving the new thread into the pattern at the tea tent. She found a seat beside old Mr. Hargreaves, a retired publican, who frequented the Blue Boar. His gnarled hands cradled a cup of tea, and his eyes, still sharp, lit up at her approach. Miss Marple, come to solve the fate's mysteries, or just here for the cake? He teased. A bit of both, Mr. Hargreaves, she replied, her smile wry. Though I confess, the villagers' talk interests me more than the Victoria Sponge. You're often at the Blue Boar. Have you noticed Mr. Reed there lately? He's been much discussed with Mr. Grayson's passing. Hargreaves chuckled, setting his cup down. Young Reed, aye. He's a regular, though not a heavy drinker. Last week, mind, he was different sat in a corner, nursing a pint, looking like the world was on his shoulders. Muttered something about too much to carry when I asked if he was well. Didn't stay long left before the darts game started. Miss Marple's fingers tightened slightly on her handbag. Too much to carry, she repeated softly. A heavy burden for a clerk. Did he speak of Mr. Grayson or his work? Not a word, Hargreaves said, shaking his head. Kept to himself. Which isn't like him. Usually, he's good for a chat about the cricket. I reckon Grayson's demands were wearing him thin. She thanked him, her mind turning over Reed's distress. Was it guilt, fear, or the weight of a secret tied to that £500 payment? She recalled a young man in St. Mary Mead, years ago, whose quiet demeanour had hidden a theft from his employers. Till Reed's position, so close to Grayson's secrets, could breed temptation or desperation. As she rose, her gaze caught the blacksmith, Mr. Tompkins, manning a stall of horseshoes and ironwork. His burly frame and soot-stained apron made him a striking figure, and Miss Marple approached, her smile disarming. Mr. Tompkins, your work is as fine as ever, she said, admiring a wrought-iron gate-latch. I wonder, have you done any repairs at Willow House lately? Windows, perhaps, or latches? Tompkins scratched his beard, his brow furrowing. Willow House, you say? I was there last week, matter of fact. Mr. Grayson had a parlour window latch sticking wouldn't catch proper. I fixed it, tightened the screws, good as new. Odd job for a man like him, but he was particular about his study. Miss Marple heart quickened, though her face betrayed nothing. The parlour window, she said, her voice light. Was it in poor condition, or just loose? Just loose, Tompkins said. Old houses, you know things work free over time. I told him it'd hold, but to call me if it slipped again. Why, ma'am, something to do with the murder? Oh, nothing certain, Miss Marple said, her tone dismissive. Just tidying up loose ends, like a good latch. Thank you, Mr. Tompkins. She moved away, her mind racing. A loose parlour window latch, repaired days before the murder, could be the key to the locked room mystery. If it hadn't been fully secured, or if someone knew its flaw, the killer could have entered and exited, locking the door with a spare key and leaving the latch to snap shut behind them. The cloaked figure seen in the garden, tall and broad, flickered in her thoughts. Baxter, perhaps. or another with access to Grayson's home at the cake stall. She overheard a snippet from two maids, their heads bent close. Clara Dunn was at the market yesterday, one said, buying thread, but she looked scared, like she'd seen a ghost. Miss Marple lingered, pretending to examine a fruitcake, and caught the other maid's reply. My sister says Clara's been writing to her kin in London, saying she's afraid to stay at Willow House now. The tidbit, small but sharp, added to Clara's fearful silhouette. Miss Marple bought a slice of cake for Lily and continued her circuit. Pausing by the tombola, where the grocer's wife, Mrs. Bantry, was selling tickets, Mrs. Bantry called, waving her over. You'll try your luck, won't you? Though I dare say you're busy with that dreadful business at Willow House. A moment's distraction does no harm, Miss Marple said, buying a ticket. The village is full of talk, Mrs. Bantry. Have you heard anything new about the Graysons or their household? Mrs. Bantry's eyes sparkled with the thrill of gossip. Well, I shouldn't say, but my nephew's friend at the bank mentioned. Mr. Grayson was asking about a loan last month, something about expanding his trade. And then there's Baxter, selling off his last field to cover debts. Grayson's success was like a boot on his neck, poor man. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing the loan away. Was Grayson overextending or planning a move that threatened? Others, Baxter's desperation, already clear, grew sharper with each report. She thanked Mrs. Bantry and moved on, her steps taking her to the edge of the green, where she sat on a bench to rest, her eyes scanning the crowd. The fate's gaiety felt distant now, her thoughts consumed by the case. Evelyn's letters to C.L. Reed's burdened demeanour, Baxter's financial ruin, Clara's fear. And the parlour windows latched, they were threads, vibrant and tangled, but drawing closer to a pattern. She thought of the scarf, left coiled like a signature, and wondered if it pointed to Baxter's trade knowledge, Reed's access, or something else, a deliberate clue to mislead. The locked door, once a barrier, now seemed a trick, its solution, hidden in the window's quiet betrayal. As the fiddler struck up a new tune, Miss Marple rose, her resolve firm. Inspector Craddock would question Evelyn again tomorrow, and she would be there, probing the widow's secrets. The blacksmith's revelation was a breakthrough, but it needed testing footprints in the garden, perhaps, or signs of tampering. She made a mental note to ask Craddock to search the rose bushes near the parlour window, where the cloaked figure had vanished. On her way home, she passed the church, where the vicar was tidying the notice board. A fine fate, Miss Marple, he called, though I fear our minds are heavy with Grayson's tragedy. Indeed, vicar, she replied, pausing. Have you seen Clara Dunn at services lately? A young girl like her must find comfort in faith, especially now. The vicar frowned, thoughtful. Clara's been absent these past weeks, which is unlike her. I saw her in the churchyard once, looking troubled, but she hurried away when I approached. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind adding Clara's avoidance to the mosaic. At her cottage, Lily greeted her with tea and a fresh report. My friend. At the dairy says Clara was asking about trains to London, miss, like she's thinking of leaving. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting in hand, the needles clicking softly. Leaving, she murmured, a girl with fears, and nowhere to turn. Tomorrow, Lily, we question Evelyn and chase the window's truth. I shall watch, and I shall listen, for in listening, one hears the echo of the crime. The case was a puzzle, its pieces sharp and scattered, but Miss Marple felt the edges aligning, the picture forming in the quiet of her mind. The fate had given her what she sought: village eyes, village voices, village truths. With each step, she drew closer to the hand that had knotted the silk scarf, and the heart that had planned Harold Grayson's end. Chapter 10. Confronting the suspects. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawns of Willow House, its golden rays softening the Georgian mansion's stern facade. Inside, the drawing room was a hush of elegance, its chintz curtains drawn back to let in the fading light. Miss Jane Marple sat in a backed chair, her hands folded over her black handbag, her eyes alert beneath the brim of her neat straw hat. The air held a faint scent of lavender and wax polish, but beneath it lingered the tension of the gathering air. Tableau of suspects summoned by Inspector Craddock to confront the threads of Harold Grayson's murder. Craddock stood by the fireplace, his notebook tucked away, his posture firm but calm. Around the room, the suspects were arranged like pieces on a chessboard. Evelyn Grayson on the velvet settee, her morning gown stark against her pale skin. Thomas read by the window, his spectacles glinting as he shifted nervously. Lionel Baxter, in an armchair, his broad frame taut with barely concealed indignation, and Clara Dunn near the door, her slight figure almost invisible in her grey dress, her hands twisting a handkerchief. The silence was heavy, broken only by the tick of a mantel clock and the distant call of a thrush outside. "Ladies and gentlemen," Craddock began, his voice steady, "thank you for coming. We're close to unravelling Mr. Grayson's murder. But there are questions yet unanswered. I've asked Miss Marple to join us, as her insights have been invaluable. Let's be clear, one of you knows more than you've said, and today we aim to find the truth." Evelyn's green eyes flickered, but her face remained composed. "I've told you everything, Inspector," she said, her tone cool. "I was in my room that night. I heard nothing, saw nothing." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice gentle but probing. "So you've said, Mrs. Grayson, yet the village speaks of your letters to London, addressed to CL, a friend, perhaps, but one you've not mentioned. Might these letters shed light on your state of mind or your plans?" Evelyn's cheeks flushed, and her hands tightened on her lap. "Those letters are private, Miss Marple. They're to a childhood friend, Charlotte Langley, nothing more. I wrote of my life here, my loneliness. They have no bearing on Harold's death." Craddock raised an eyebrow, jotting a note on a pad he'd produced. "We'll need to verify that, Mrs. Grayson. A simple matter of contacting Miss Langley. You understand, we must explore every avenue." Evelyn nodded, her lips tight, but Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in her fingers. A truth, perhaps, but not the whole truth. She turned her gaze to Reed, who stood rigid, his eyes darting between Craddock and the floor. "Mr. Reed," she said, her tone as soft as a breeze, "you were the last to see Mr. Grayson alive, save the killer. You left at 7, you say, but the grocer's boy saw a figure near Willow House at 9. You were burdened last week, here, drinking alone at the Blue Boar. Was there something weighing on you as something tied to that £500 payment you recorded?" Reed's face paled, and he pushed his spectacles up, a nervous tick. "I've explained that payment, ma'am. Mr. Grayson handled it himself, only wrote it down. I was at the Blue Boar by 8, as the landlord said. I couldn't have been that figure, and yes, I was troubled. Mr. Grayson was demanding, and I felt the strain. But I didn't kill him." Craddock's voice was firm. "That payment's still a mystery, Red. The bank's tracing it, but your handwriting's on. If it was blackmail or a bribe, And you knew. Now's the time to say, Reed's voice rose, a note of desperation creeping in. I swear, sir, I don't know. Mr. Grayson said it was for a supplier, to be kept quiet. I did as I was told. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, catching the shift in his tone. She turned to Baxter, whose face was flushed with indignation, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Mr. Baxter, she said, your rivalry with Mr. Grayson was no secret. You lost a vital contract, and your debts are mounting. You knew Willow House, having visited before, and the scarf silk, like the samples you handle. You're a man of action, I think, and action can turn to vengeance. Baxter's eyes blazed, and he leaned forward, his voice a low growl. I've had enough of this, Miss Marple. Yes, I hated Grayson. He ruined me, and I won't pretend I mourn him. But I was at home that night, as Mrs. Pollard told you. I know silk eye, but so does half the trade. You're fishing, and I'm not your catch. Craddock stepped in, his tone sharp. Then explain your presence near Willow House last month. Baxter, arguing with Grayson in the garden. Witnesses saw you, and you never mentioned it. That's not the behavior of an innocent man. Baxter's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. I went to reason with him one last time about that Calcutta deal. He mocked me, said I was finished. I left in a temper, but I didn't go back. I'm no murderer. Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her mind was relentless. Reason can turn to rage, Mr. Baxter. And you knew the house perhaps. You noticed a window latch, loose and inviting, during your visits. The blacksmith repaired one in the parlour just before the murder, but a man like you might know how to exploit such a flaw. Baxter's face darkened, but before he could retort, Miss Marple turned to Clara, who stood frozen, her handkerchief a crumpled knot in her hands. Clara, she said, her voice like a mother's, you've been so quiet, my dear, but your silence speaks. You found Mr. Grayson locked in his parlour, yet you knew of the spare key on the hall table. And your time with Mr. Baxter, you left his employ under a cloud. What did you see in his study, Clara, that made him send you away? Clara's eyes filled with tears, and her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't mean to pry, ma'am. I was dusting, and I saw papers, letters, angry ones, about Mr. Grayson. Mr. Baxter came in, shouted I was spying, and sacked me. I never told anyone, not even Mr. Grayson when he hired me. I was afraid he'd come after me. Baxter shot to his feet, his voice booming. That's a lie. She was nosing where she didn't belong, and I let her go. Those letters were business, nothing sinister. You're twisting it, girl. Craddock raised a hand, his tone commanding. Sit down, Baxter. Clara, go on. Did you ever see Baxter near Willow House after you left his employ? Clara shook her head, tears spilling now. No, sir, but I heard him once, at the market, saying Mr. Grayson would pay for what he'd done. I kept quiet, I didn't want trouble. Miss Marple watched her closely, noting the genuine fear in her eyes. You're safe now, Clara, she said gently. But you must tell us everything. That night, when you went to your attic, did you truly hear nothing? A creak, a voice, a window's rattle. Clara's breath hitched, and she looked down, her voice trembling. I thought I heard a thud, ma'am, around 9, but I was half asleep. I told myself it was the house settling. I didn't dare check. Craddock's eyes sharpened, and he made a note. A thud at 9 near the time of death. Why didn't you mention this before, Clara? I was scared, sir. Clara whispered. I didn't know if it was real, and with Mr. Grayson dead, I thought I'd be blamed. Miss Marple leaned back, her mind weaving the new threads. Evelyn's letters, Reed's burden, Baxter's denial, Clara's thud, the parlour windows. Loose latch, repaired but perhaps not secure, loomed large. She addressed the room, her voice clear and measured. The truth is close, I think. Mr. Grayson was killed in a locked room, but the door was a ruse. The parlour window, with its faulty latch, could have allowed entry and exit. The spare key, known to all in the house, could lock the door from outside. The scarf, left behind, points to someone who knew Grayson's trade, his rival, his clerk, or perhaps another. But the killer was bold, striking in his own home, and cunning, leaving no trace but what they chose. Evelyn's face was pale, her voice sharp. You're saying one of us did this, but you've no proof. I was upstairs, grieving a husband I tried to love. Reed's voice cracked. I was loyal to him. I'd never betray his trust, not after all he did for me. Baxter's fists clenched, his tone bitter. You're wasting time on me when the real killer's laughing. Look. To Grayson's own house, not mine. Clara sobbed quietly, her words muffled. I only wanted to do my work, not see him dead. Craddock raised a hand for silence. We're not done. I'm searching the garden tomorrow for signs of entry footprints. Broken twigs. And we're tracing that payment, those letters, and Baxter's movements. If anyone has more to say, now's the time. The room fell silent, each suspect locked in their own thoughts. Miss Marple watched them, her eyes lingering on Baxter's clenched fists, Clara's trembling shoulders, Reed's averted gaze, and Evelyn's rigid poise. The truth was there, she felt, in their reactions, their silences, their fears as they left Willow House. The sky was streaked with crimson, the air cool and still. Craddock walked Miss Marple to the gate, his face thoughtful. That thud, Clara mentioned it's new, and it fits the timeline. And the window LeCue were right to push on that. What's your sense now? Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. The window is the key, Inspector, and the scarf is the signature. Baxter's rage is real, but his denial feels practiced. Clara's fear hides a truth she dares not speak. Reed's burden is heavier than loyalty, and Evelyn's letters are a door to her heart, her plans. Tomorrow's search may tip the balance. Craddock nodded, offering a lift, but Miss Marple declined, her smile firm. The walk clears the mind, Inspector, and the village may yet whisper something new. At her cottage, Lily was waiting with tea and a fresh rumour. The gardener's lad says he found a torn bit of cloth near Willow House's rose bushes. Miss caught on a thorn, grey like a coat. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resumed, the needles clicking softly. A cloth, she murmured, a small thing but sharp. Tomorrow, Lily, we search the garden and probe Evelyn's heart. I shall see and I shall know, for in knowing one finds the killer's shadow. The case was a knot, its strands tight and dark, but Miss Marple felt the weave loosening, the truth glinting like a needle in the fabric of St. Mary Mead. Chapter 11. The scarf's tail, the morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, shrouding Willow House in a veil of silver as Miss Jane Marple arrived, her sensible shoes damp from the dew-soaked path. The air was sharp with the scent of wet earth and fading roses, and her navy coat was buttoned tightly against the chill. The confrontation with the suspects had sharpened the case's edges, each reaction Evelyn's guarded poise. Reed's desperate denials, Baxter's bristling rage, Clara's tearful fear aiding a new stitch to the pattern. The parlour window's faulty latch and the cloaked figure in the garden had brought the locked room mystery into focus. But the silk scarf, coiled like a serpent in her mind, held the key to the killer's intent. Inspector Craddock met her at the garden gate, his face etched with determination. Beside him stood a young constable, holding a small evidence bag containing a scrap of grey cloth, its edges frayed. "Morning, Miss Marple," Craddock said, his voice low. "We searched the rose bushes, as you suggested. This was caught on a thorn near the parlour window, could be from that cloaked figure the grocer's boy saw. And the window latch. The blacksmith's repair was solid, but it's loose again, as if tampered with." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her expression remained serene. "A cloth and a latch. Inspectors maul threads, but they weave. Story. Let us examine the window first, then turn to the scarf. Its tale is not yet told." They crossed the garden, the grass soft underfoot, to the parlour's exterior wall. The window, tall and mullioned, overlooked the rose bushes, its latch glinting in the mist. Craddock lifted the sash, revealing a brass latch that moved to icily, its screws slightly askew. "It's been worked loose," he said, frowning. "Not broken, but enough to let someone slip in and out, then push it back to look secure." Miss Marple leaned closer, her gloved fingers tracing the frame without touching. "A clever trick," she murmured. "The killer entered here, I think, and left the same way, locking the door with the spare key from the hall table. The latches. Floor was known to someone who studied this house perhaps, from a prior visit, or a servant's gossip." Craddock nodded, making a note. "Baxter's been here before, and he's tall, broad matches the cloaked figure. This cloth could be from his coat. But Reed's nervous enough to plan something this careful, and Evelyn or Clara had easier access to the key." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her mind threading the possibilities. "The cloth is a clue, but the scarf is the heart, Inspector. It's not. Its presence why? Leave it behind. Let us go inside and look at it again." They entered the parlour through the front door, the constable trailing behind. The room was, as Miss Marple remembered, opulent, with its mahogany shelves, Persian rug, an oak desk, now eerily silent without Grayson's presence. The silk scarf lay on the desk, sealed in a clear evidence bag, its blue and gold threads catching the light. Craddock opened the bag, spreading the scarf on a cloth too. Avoid contamination. Its weave was tight, its texture smooth yet strong. The knot now loosened still, bearing the marks of its intricate design. Miss Marple studied it, her eyes narrowing. "This knot is no accident," she said softly. "It's precise, almost decorative, like a sailor's work or a craftsman's. Silk is slippery, yet this held fast, suggesting skill. Someone in the trade, Baxter, perhaps, or Red, who handled Grayson's samples, would know how to tie it so." Craddock ran a finger along the scarf's edge. Clara identified it as Grayson's stock, kept in his office here. Anyone in the house could have taken it, but leaving it behind feels personal, like a message. Grayson's own silk used to choke him poetic in a twisted way. Miss Marple nodded, her mind drifting to a case in St. Mary Mead, where a ribbon left at. A crime scene had pointed to a spurned lover's revenge. "Poetry or pride," she said. "The killer wanted us to see this, to marvel at their boldness. But pride betrays. Inspector, let us consider the suspect's hands. Baxter's, rough from years of trade. Reed's, stained with ink but deft. Evelyn's, delicate but capable. Clara's, small but practiced. Who among them could tie such a knot? Craddock gestured to the constable, who produced a photograph of the scarf as it was found, the knot tight around an outline of Grayson's neck. The coroner said it took strength to hold it, he said. Grayson was robust, yet there was no struggle, no torn clothes, no scratches. He was caught off guard, likely by someone he trusted. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the photograph, then shifted to the desk, where a small drawer still held the spare key she'd noted earlier. Trust or surprise, she said. The window allowed entry, the key locked the door, but the scarf tells us the killer's mind. Baxter's motive is strongest. His losses, his rage, his knowledge of silk. The cloth in the garden could be his, and his housekeeper's weak alibi leaves room for doubt. Craddock frowned, pacing to the fireplace. Baxter's my top suspect. But Reed's payment bothers me. If he was involved in something shady blackmail, say he might have panicked when Grayson found out. And Evelyn's letters to CL, what if they're planning an escape, or worse? Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice gentle but firm. Evelyn's letters are a thread to follow, but her hands lack the strength for this knot, I think. Reed's burden is real, but his fear feels more like a bystander's than a killer's. Clara's silence is fear. Not guilt, she saw something, perhaps at Baxter's, that binds her to this. But Baxter, his pride, his losses, his presence near Willow House points to a man who could act and cover his tracks. She stepped to the window, peering at the latch again. The cloth, Inspector grey, like a man's coat. Baxter's is heavy, grey, seen by the gardener's lad. And the thud Clara heard at 9-it could be the window sash dropping as the killer left. The pieces fit, but we need proof. Craddock nodded, his face resolute. I'm having the cloth tested. For fibres might match Baxter's coat, and I've sent a man to London to check Evelyn's CL, and that solicitor Grayson consulted. We'll search Baxter's house today, look for anything tying him to the scarf or the window. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. Good, and ask Mrs. Pollard, his housekeeper, about that night again. Her hearing may be poor, but her loyalty to Baxter could hide a lie. And Clara speak to her gently, alone. She's close to breaking, and her truth may be the final thread. They left the parlour, the scarf returned to its bag, the room sealed behind them. Outside, the mist was lifting, revealing the garden in sharp detail: rose bushes, gravel paths, and the telltale thorn where the cloth was found. Craddock offered a lift, but Miss Marple, as ever, chose to walk. The village breathes, Inspector, she said, her smile wry. Its whispers may yet guide us. As she set off, the constable called after her, holding up a small notebook. Found in the garden, half buried under leaves. Miss Marple, this was near the rosebush, it could be nothing. But it's got initials. L. B. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained calm. Lionel Baxter, she murmured, or a coincidence, but I think not. Keep it safe, constable, and check for fingerprints. She continued home, the village waking around her shop shutters opening, a milk cart clattering by. At the post office, she paused to chat with Miss Weatherby, who had a fresh tidbit. Mrs. Grayson's letters to CL stopped the day after the murder, ma'am. Odd, don't you think? Miss Marple thanked her, her mind weaving the detail into place. Evelyn's silence, Baxter's initials, the scarf's knot, they were converging, the pattern clearer now. At her cottage, Lily greeted her with tea. And a rumour, The baker's boy saw Mr. Baxter burning papers in his garden last week, miss, late at night. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting in hand, the needles clicking softly. Burning papers, she murmured. A man erasing. Traces tomorrow, Lily. We search Baxter's world and coax Clara's truth. I shall listen, and I shall know. For, in knowing, one sees the killer's face. The case was a tapestry, its threads dark and tight, but Miss Marple felt the weave unravelling, the scarf's tale leading her to the heart of Harold Grayson's. Murder. Baxter's shadow loomed large, but the final proof lay just beyond her grasp, waiting in the quiet of St. Mary Mead. Chapter 12. The rival unmasked. The twilight settled over St. Mary Mead, casting a soft purple glow across Willow House, as Miss Jane, Marple, and Inspector Craddock gathered the suspects once more in the drawing-room. The air was thick with anticipation. The elegant rooms, chintz, curtains, and silver tea service at odds with the grim purpose of their assembly. Miss Marple sat near the fireplace, her black handbag on her lap, her eyes calm but piercing, like a seamstress threading a needle through intricate cloth. The scarf's tail, the loose window latch, the grey cloth, and the notebook with LB. Initials had tightened the case's weave, and now, she felt, the final stitch was near. Craddock stood by the mantel, his face resolute, a small evidence bag in hand containing the frayed cloth and the notebook. Evelyn Grayson sat on the velvet settee, her morning gown immaculate, her hands clasped tightly. Thomas Reed hovered near a bookcase, his spectacles catching the lamplight as he shifted uneasily. Lionel Baxter occupied an armchair, his broad frame tense, his eyes defiant. Clara Dunn stood by the door, her handkerchief a crumpled knot, her face pale with dread. The room's silence was broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl. "Ladies and gentlemen," Craddock began, his voice steady, "we've reached a turning point in Mr. Grayson's murder. Thanks to Miss Marple's insights and new evidence, we're ready to name the killer. But first, let's review the facts, so there's no doubt." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but clear. Mr. Grayson was strangled in his parlour, a silk scarf from his own stock knotted tightly around his neck. The door was locked, the key in his pocket, yet the killer escaped, leaving no trace but the scarf. We now know the parlour window's latch was loose, despite a recent repair, allowing entry and exit. A grey cloth, caught on a rosebush, and a notebook with LB initials point to a specific hand. The scarf's knot, intricate and strong, suggests skill in handling silk, a skill shared by few. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. "You're implying one of us exploited that window, Miss Marple, but I was upstairs, reading. I knew nothing of latches or scarves." Reed's voice trembled as he spoke. "I was at the Blue Boar, Inspector. I couldn't have been at Willow House at 9. That payment you keep mentioning, only recorded it as Mr. Grayson ordered." Baxter's face reddened, his fists clenching. "This is absurd. You've got a scrap of cloth and some initials, and you point at me. I was at home, as I told you, and I've no skill with fancy knots." Clara's eyes brimmed with tears, her whisper barely audible. "I only found him, ma'am. I didn't touch that window or the scarf. I swear it." Miss Marple's gaze moved from one to another, her mind threading the final pattern. "Each of you had reason to resent Mr. Grayson," she said softly. "Mrs. Grayson, your letters to C.L. Charlotte Langley, as you claim, suggest a longing for escape. Though we've confirmed they were innocent, Mr. Reed, your burden. and that £500 payment hint at secrets, but the bank traced it to a legitimate supplier, not blackmail. Clara, your fear stems from what you saw at Mr. Baxter's, a letter threatening Grayson, which you kept silent to protect yourself. But you, Mr. Baxter, your losses, your rage, and your presence near Willow House, we've a different story. Baxter shot to his feet, his voice a growl. Enough. You've no proof, just village gossip and a bit of cloth. I didn't kill Grayson. Craddock raised a hand, his tone firm. Sit down, Baxter. We searched your house this morning. In your study, we found a silk sample matching Grayson's stock, stolen, perhaps from his office during one of your visits, and your coat, grey and heavy, has a tear matching the cloth from the rose bush. The notebook's yours, to your initials, your handwriting, dropped in haste as you fled the garden. Miss Marple's voice was gentle, almost sorrowful. You planned it carefully, Mr. Baxter. You knew Willow House from past visits, noticed the parlour window's faulty latch during an argument in the garden. You waited until Reed left, until Evelyn was upstairs and Clara in her attic. At 9, cloaked in your heavy coat, you slipped through the window. Scarf in hand, a piece you'd taken from Grayson's stock to mock his success. You caught him, unawares, perhaps, as he sat at his desk, and strangled him with the scarf, tying it with the skill of a man who's handled silk for decades. You locked the door with the spare key from the hall table, returned it, and left through the window, pushing the latch to seem secure. But you dropped your notebook, and the cloth tore on a thorn, betraying you. Baxter's face drained of colour, his hands trembling. You're weaving a fairy tale, Miss Marple. That cloth could be anyone's, and the notebook planted, maybe, by Reed or the girl. Clara gasped, shaking her head. I never, sir. I saw those letters at your house, yes, but I didn't take anything. Reed's voice was shrill. I didn't plant it. I was at the pub, I tell you. Evelyn's eyes widened, but she remained silent, her composure cracking as she watched Baxter. Miss Marple continued, her voice steady. The scarf was your signature. Mr. Baxter, symbol of Grayson's triumph, turned against him. You left it to taunt, to show the world you'd bested him at last. But pride, as it often does, betrayed you. The cloth, the notebook, the latch'll point to you. And Mrs. Pollard, your housekeeper, admitted today she didn't see you after 8 that night. Her hearing, as you relied on, kept her from noticing your absence. Baxter sank back into his chair, his defiance crumbling. You've no witnesses, no proof I was in that parlour, he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Craddock stepped forward, holding up the evidence bag. We have enough, Baxter. The fibres from your coat match the cloth exactly, and your fingerprints are on the notebook. You're under arrest for the murder of Harold Grayson. As the constable moved to cuff him, Baxter's shoulders slumped, and a bitter laugh escaped him. He ruined me, he said, his voice low. Took everything, my trade, my pride. I wanted him to feel it, to know I'd won in the end. That scarf, it was his crown, and I made it his noose. Evelyn gasped, her hand to her mouth. Reed stared, his spectacles slipping down his nose. Clara sobbed quietly, her handkerchief pressed to her face. Miss Marple watched her expression, one of quiet sorrow. Greed and pride, Mr. Baxter, she said softly. They unravel even the cleverest plans. You thought to crush your rival, but the truth always finds its way. Craddock nodded to the constable, who led Baxter out, his heavy steps echoing in the hall. The room fell silent, the weight of the confession settling over them. Evelyn rose, her voice trembling. I didn't know. I thought perhaps, but not this. Reed wiped his brow, his relief palpable. Thank God it's over. I never thought Baxter would go so far. Clara's tears slowed, and she whispered, I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner, ma'am. I was so afraid. Miss Marple reached out, patting her hand. You did what you could, my dear. Fear is a heavy burden, but you've laid it down now. Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his face a mix of admiration and relief. You saw it all, didn't you? The window, the scarf, Baxter's pride-ivory piece. Miss Marple's smile was faint, her eyes distant. I saw only what people showed, Inspector. Their hearts, their flaws, their secrets. The village told the rest. As they left Willow House, the night was clear, the stars bright above. Mary Mead, Craddock offered a lift, but Miss Marple declined, her shawl drawn close. The walk will do me good, Inspector. The air is clearer now. At her cottage, Lily was waiting, her eyes wide with anticipation. Is it true, miss? They say Mr. Baxter's been taken away. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting. Resumed, the needles clicking softly. It's true, Lily. The scarf told its tale, and the village its truth. Now let us have tea, and let St. Mary Mead rest. The case was done, the tapestry complete, its dark threads woven into a pattern. Of justice, Miss Marple's needles moved steadily, her mind at peace. The quiet of the village restored until the next not needed unravelling.